Clearly our biggest opponent was the government, but that's Milosevic and his regime. That was relatively easy to notice, as a straightforward opponent. But we had, I wouldn't call them opponents, but I would call them obstacles. We had obstacles on our side of the struggle, among the opposition, and that was, we couldn't call them opponents, but we were really mad at them, and we saw them as a bigger problem than the government and than the regime. These were the politicians that were running different political parties or different factions on the Serbian political scene. Some of them were members of the regime, and then they split later. Some of them were opposing the regime from the very beginning, but they had like very minor support and influence. One thing they all had in common, that they all wanted to be in charge, and they thought that if they managed to somehow become the leaders of this movement against Milosevic, then everything is going to be solved. So they spend a lot of energy fighting each other, presenting different ideas, ways how to do it, and a lot of energy was wasted that way. So we spent a lot of time and effort trying to bring them on board and trying to have them support the idea of having one candidate, whoever that is, against Milosevic, and that everybody stands behind and supports this candidate. We lost probably a whole year, if not two, just working on that. So, if we uncover this kind of very easy, I would call it misconception, that you have like the regime on one side and that you have the movement on the other side. Actually, our biggest problem was in our own yard because of lack of unity. And so once we managed to establish unity among our in our ranks, we actually became more effective. But this unity never became ideological unity or full political unity, that we now subscribe to the same ideas and the same vision. We actually decided to leave everything aside and to go for two things. First thing is removal of Milosevic, and second thing is elections, which are going to be free and fair, and then in these elections all these differences can come out, and then the people will decide, do they favor this particular political option or some other. So I would call our own how shall I say, political leaders in the opposition our biggest obstacle. And once we managed to solve that, facing the repression and facing the regime wasn't so difficult. I have to say that from the very beginning, we had a substantial level of support in the population, and the reason why we had that was because we started the movement as students, as young people, and who doesn't like young people, especially if they're well educated, if they go to the university. So we were seen as the future of Serbia, and in that sense, people liked us. However, supporting the resistance movement wasn't enough, and one thing we wanted to have was to move people from being supporters to being active participants. Because for general strike, it's not enough to support the general strike. You have to actually go on strike yourself. So we needed to have this. And although the people were, as I said, people were liking us, and they thought that we were on the right side of history, they were reluctant to get involved. And the reason why they were reluctant to get involved was because we had a history of failed attempts to fight against Milosevic, and none of these attempts succeeded, and people lost faith that anything could be done. So what we had to do is to show with our personal example, through small victories, that progress is possible. Instead of focusing on Milosevic and the need for him to step down, we actually did a lot of small struggles on a local level and a regional level based on like some local problems. And when we managed to win in those fights, this is what increased our credibility, and this is what turned our supporters into active participants. So as we were, spreading around the country, we would, talk to farmers in different regions, or workers in different factories, and we would learn what was their problem that they were facing. And then we would try to help them with that problem by helping in organization and action around that problem. So once this problem was solved, or at least once everybody knew about it, and once that problem became visible outside of their town, this also helped the visibility of the movement in general, because we became associated with raising problems and attempting to solve them. And these problems varied from lack of electricity in a village to some corrupt local mayor, or anything that the local community would how shall I say, anything that the local community would see as their urgent problem. What was the beauty of having the resistance movement involved in all this was that everybody started connecting these local problems with the overall problem, which was the Milosevic regime. So although we gave visibility to these local problems also gave visibility to the overall struggle. One of the problems that we faced from the, let's say, very beginning was that there was a total blackout when it comes to independent media in Belgrade and in bigger towns in Serbia. At the time when the resistance movement was formed, the new law on information was passed, which made it impossible to have big independent news organization, a TV station, a radio, or a newspaper. And this is, we're talking about late 90s, which is the time where internet was still new, and the economic situation in Serbia was so harsh that people didn't have access to internet. So what we had to do was to print underground brochures and newspapers, and to kind of put posters on walls and use graffiti and that kind of messaging in order to reach people. However, over time, because we spread outside of Belgrade and we spread to the countryside, one thing that we discovered was that there was a lot of local media in really small towns that have population of 10,000 people maximum. And these local media actually enjoyed much higher level of freedom than the media in big cities, as long as they were dealing with local problems. And so by addressing local problems and by organizing campaigns around local problems, we actually managed to create visibility in the local media. Finally, when the regime realized what was going on, they attempted to shut them down, but it was already developing so fast that it was impossible to kind of close all these small newspapers and radio stations all over the place. And when they attempted to do it, people got organized, and they were actually protecting these radio stations and newspapers and preventing government officials from closing them down. So we actually, at the very end of our struggle, the countryside was much better informed about what was going on than Belgrade, than the capital. So because government managed to maintain control in the capital, but outside it actually was already, the countryside was already lost, and they couldn't maintain control anymore. So, but still, in Belgrade especially, we had one branch of our operations which was called Resistance from the Neighborhood, and this was our attempt to use local neighborhood committees to disseminate information about what is going on, because there was no other way that these people could find out what was going on. So by printing and distributing material through these neighborhood committees, we actually had people informed about our activities and about general political situation.